Donald Trump says he's the savior of American jobs, but one of the most iconic American companies, John Deere, is calling his bluff. Are his promises just political theater, or is there real substance behind the slogans? Let's dig into the dirt and uncover the truth. What's really going on? Trump has always said he'd protect American jobs. From the moment he stepped back into the White House, he doubled down on that message, positioning himself as the champion of working-class Americans and vowing to stop companies from chasing cheap labor overseas. His biggest promise? A massive 200% tariff on any company that offshores jobs but still wants to sell in the U.S. A bold move for sure, one that sent a clear warning to corporations. Move jobs overseas and you'll pay the price. But here's the thing, economics isn't that simple. Campaign promises sound great, but the reality of global trade is a lot more complicated. Trump's threats of massive tariffs sounded tough, but did they actually stop companies from moving jobs overseas? Not really. John Deere and others kept shifting jobs out of the country, even as Trump vowed to stop them. For workers in the Midwest, this isn't just about politics, it's about survival. Manufacturing towns have faced wave after wave of layoffs, despite countless promises from politicians. Workers don't need more speeches, they need real action. And yet, despite all the America First messaging, major corporations aren't backing down. If Trump's serious, why is John Deere still leaving? John Deere isn't just moving jobs, it's testing Trump's ability to stop them. For decades, John Deere was a symbol of American manufacturing. Its green and yellow machines represented quality, durability, and American craftsmanship. A job at John Deere in places like Iowa and Illinois meant stability, good pay, and a solid middle-class life. But now, that legacy is fading. In 2024, John Deere announced massive layoffs at its Ottumwa, Iowa plant, cutting nearly one-third of its workforce. Many longtime employees were given buyouts, while hundreds more were simply let go. And the worst part? These jobs weren't disappearing. They were just moving to Monterrey, Mexico. Why is John Deere ignoring Trump's tariff threats? If corporations were really afraid of Trump's tariffs, they wouldn't be rushing to move production overseas. So why is John Deere pushing ahead anyway? The answer comes down to two things: labor costs and profits. In Mexico, factory workers earn far less than their American counterparts. Companies face fewer regulations and often get government incentives to set up shop. With lower costs, corporations can boost their profits while still selling to American consumers. At the end of the day, these companies are making cold, hard business decisions. The real question is, can Trump actually change that? It's not just wages, it's Wall Street pressure. John Deere, like most big corporations, isn't just looking at labor costs, it's also answering to Wall Street. In 2023, Deere made a staggering $10 billion in profit. But instead of reinvesting in its workforce, it spent $8 billion on stock buybacks and dividends to keep investors happy. That tells you everything. The priority wasn't saving jobs. It was boosting shareholder returns. So here's the real question. If John Deere isn't afraid of Trump's tariffs, why would any other company be? Instead of setting an example for keeping jobs in America, John Deere is setting a dangerous precedent, one that other corporations are likely to follow. The hidden loopholes that make outsourcing so easy. This isn't just about cheap labor. Corporations have spent decades perfecting ways to move jobs while dodging American labor laws. John Deere's offshoring isn't an isolated case. It's part of a system designed to make outsourcing easy and nearly impossible for American workers to fight back. One of the biggest tricks in the corporate playbook? The two-tier system. Here's how it works. Instead of shutting down a factory overnight, companies divide workers into two groups: long-term employees and new hires. The new hires get lower wages and weaker benefits, creating a gap between them and older employees. Over time, as veteran workers retire or leave, the lower-paid workforce becomes the majority. Once wages are driven low enough, the company justifies closing the factory completely, shifting the remaining jobs overseas. It's not an immediate cut. It's a slow bleed. Workers are forced to accept worse conditions just to keep their jobs a little longer. But in the end, the result is the same. And then there's the loophole that makes tariffs almost useless: international supply chains. Why tariffs might not work. Even if Trump slaps a 200% tariff on imported goods, companies have a workaround. They can simply route production through multiple countries before bringing the final product to the U.S. For example, a company manufactures parts in Mexico, assembles them in Canada, then ships the finished product to the United States, all while technically dodging the full tariff penalty. So that raises a bigger question. Why is it so easy for companies to move jobs overseas in the first place? The answer goes back decades, to a trade deal that changed everything. The trade deal that made offshoring easy. This isn't a new problem. It started with a single agreement. To understand why companies like John Deere can so easily shift jobs to Mexico, we have to go back to 1994, when the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, was signed. NAFTA eliminated trade barriers between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, making it easier for goods and jobs to move freely across borders. On paper, it was supposed to boost economic growth for all three countries. In reality, it gave corporations a free pass to chase cheap labor wherever they could find it. Both Democrats and Republicans supported NAFTA, even though labor unions warned it would gut American manufacturing. Over the years, presidents from Bill Clinton to George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and even Trump have tried and failed to fully reverse the damage. Did Trump's trade deal fix anything? In 2020, Trump replaced NAFTA with the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. It added some worker protections but didn't stop offshoring. The biggest change? It focused on enforcing labor rights in Mexico. But that hasn't stopped companies like John Deere from moving jobs south while still selling to American consumers. At the end of the day, even with tariff threats, trade agreements, and tough talk from politicians, corporations will keep outsourcing until it's no longer profitable. For American workers, this isn't just politics. It's a fight for survival. Can anything actually stop this? American workers have been fighting back for years, but it hasn't been easy. If politicians won't stop the job cuts, workers will. The John Deere and Case IH strikes. Workers take a stand. In October 2021, more than 10,000 John Deere workers across the Midwest walked off the job. They were demanding higher wages, better benefits, and job security. Their frustration had been building for years, but when Deere reported record-breaking profits while refusing to give workers a fair raise, they had enough. Led by the United Auto Workers, UAW, the strike lasted more than a month, and this wasn't just about pay, it was about fairness. Deere had made $5.9 billion in profit that year. Yet workers were still stuck in a two-tier pay system that permanently locked new hires into lower wages. Despite booming profits, Deere refused to share the wealth. Workers risked their livelihoods by walking out, standing on picket lines, and demanding real change. And for a moment, it looked like they had won. In November 2021, Deere gave in, agreeing to better wages, improved retirement benefits, and a stronger commitment to workers' rights. But the fight wasn't over. Case IH, one of the longest strikes in modern history. In May 2023, workers at Case IH followed Deere's lead. They went on strike for more than 260 days, one of the longest labor battles in recent history. Just like at Deere, Case IH workers were up against corporate greed, outsourcing threats, unfair wage structures. Their fight paid off. At first, they won a new contract, but corporations weren't about to accept defeat so easily. The brutal reality: how companies retaliate. Within a year of settling the strike, Case IH laid off over 200 workers and announced plans to move production to Mexico. At John Deere, it was the same story. Despite the new contract, the company quietly slashed its workforce by a third in some locations. Winning a strike wasn't enough. Corporations were finding new ways to retaliate. So that raises a tough question. What happens when workers fight back and companies push even harder? The answer is brutal. Corporate retaliation. How companies punish workers for fighting back. Companies don't just let workers win, they make them pay for even trying. After the historic 2021 John Deere strike, workers returned to their jobs, only to find that those jobs were disappearing anyway. Layoffs started rolling out in waves. Even those who had fought for the contract weren't safe. At Case IH, it was even more blatant. The company announced over 300 job cuts in its Iowa and Wisconsin plants, the same locations where workers had gone on strike. Coincidence? Not a chance. The message from these corporations was loud and clear. If you fight us, we will make you pay. The playbook: how companies retaliate against workers. Corporations have several tactics they use to punish workers and discourage future strikes. Massive layoffs, disguised as economic necessity. Instead of meeting worker demands, companies slash jobs and blame the economy, even though they're often expanding elsewhere, usually overseas. Fear campaigns. Inside factories, managers spread whisper campaigns warning employees, if you push for better wages, we'll just move the plant to Mexico or China. Workers are made to feel replaceable, so they think twice before organizing. Deliberate hiring freezes. Even when production demand stays high, companies refuse to hire new workers in locations where strikes happened. The result? Longer hours, harsher conditions, more burnout, benefit reductions. Sure, wages might technically go up after a strike, but companies get their money back by raising health insurance costs, eliminating bonuses, weakening retirement plans. The two-tier wage system, a divide-and-conquer strategy. By locking new hires into lower pay, corporations create division between workers. Veteran employees resent new hires for earning less. New hires feel stuck in a system they didn't create. This makes future strikes harder to organize, and that's exactly the point. The bottom line. For corporations, it's not just about cutting costs, it's about control. Workers might win battles, but companies are playing the long game, and they've got the power, the money, and the strategies to fight back. So the real question is, how do workers fight back and actually win? The devastating impact on small towns. When factories shut down, it's not just jobs that disappear. Entire communities suffer. Local businesses close, schools lose funding, infrastructure crumbles. These towns were built around manufacturing, and when the jobs vanish, so does everything else. But even as corporations retaliate against workers, the fight isn't over. Because while tariffs might help, history shows they're not enough. Companies find loopholes or simply absorb the cost and keep outsourcing. So what do corporations really fear? Worker unity across borders. When American jobs move overseas, it's easy to blame foreign workers. But the truth is, American workers and Mexican workers are fighting the same battle. In 2023, workers at a Caterpillar plant in Mexico went on strike, demanding better wages and working conditions. The company retaliated by firing the lead organizer and blacklisting workers, making it impossible for them to find jobs elsewhere. Under the USMCA, the new NAFTA, the Biden administration had the power to step in. At first, they forced Caterpillar to reinstate the fired worker, but when workers pushed for stronger protections, the government backed off. The bigger picture, a global fight. This isn't just happening in Mexico, it's the same playbook in China, Vietnam, and other low-wage countries. Corporations suppress wages, They silence unions. They blacklist workers who fight back. And as long as workers stay divided, companies win. The real solution? Worker solidarity. Corporations rely on division. They want American and Mexican workers fighting each other instead of fighting them.